House of the Dragon Episode 9 was basically a series of things going wrong for Rhaenyra's faction. The Greens have fully entrenched themselves in King's Landing and named Aegon II as heir to the throne and now King of the Seven Kingdoms. I want to talk about one particular issue for the Blacks that has just come up that I haven't really seen a ton of other people mentioning, and it involves Rhaenys, her dragon Meleys, and the events that occurred at Aegon II's coronation. So I'm going to discuss that coronation, some of the changes that were made from the books regarding it, and what I think that deeper problem is. There will be a few spoilers later in this video, but I will be sure to mark them with a timestamp in the description just to hopefully have people avoid them, because I don't wish to spoil anybody on anything. If you enjoyed this, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, do all that. I really appreciate any support on this because I love talking about A Song of Ice and Fire and all things related to it. So the big ending to the episode was Rhaenys bursting through the floor of the dragon pit on her dragon, Meleys, and essentially fleeing the city, though she had the chance to potentially kill all of the Greens on the stage there. She did not take it. That is the main portion of the scene that I've seen discussed online. However, I do think that there is another issue with it that I think could belie deeper problems for Rhaenyra's side of the conflict in its entirety. And I'm going to talk about that specifically today. Rhaenys' very presence in this scene and in King's Landing at all is a big change from the books in this episode. In the book, Fire and Blood, Lucerys' claimed driftmark was brought into question about 3 years prior to Viserys' death. So there's no reason for anybody from Rhaenyra's court to be still in King's Landing. At that point, nobody really was, other than Eric Cargill, who still steals Viserys' crown and delivers it to Rhaenyra. However, Rhaenys being here, I think, was a fantastic change. It allowed for a lot more drama and made the stakes feel a lot higher, as there was a member of the Black Court in King's Landing currently and with a dragon. But I do think that overall she kind of stole the show for me this episode, particularly her conversation with Alicent. I really loved. It had some of my favorite dialogue of the season so far and had some really deep insights into both of their characters. But the bombastic ending of the episode was her coming into the dragon pit on Meleys' back and choosing not to kill the Greens, which I think is fair. Kinslaying is very accursed in Westeros. It's very commonly known that if you kill a member of your family, you will bear this ill omen until you die, which is kind of fair. It's generally not good to kill your family, I would say. And Rhaenys probably did not want to do that, and at least did not want to be seen as someone who did that, despite the fact that that could end a lot of the conflict right there. However, she did do a lot of other murder. The dragon pit floor held a lot of commoners, too many to count, and a decent proportion of them likely died due to Meleys bursting through the floor. And I think that this is a big problem for Rhaenyra's faction. Let me explain. In episode 4 of House of the Dragon, we saw Daemon and Rhaenyra going through the streets of King's Landing disguised as commoners. Rhaenyra got to live life outside of the Red Keep for a little bit, which she seemed to very much enjoy. That's something she's not really been able to do in the past. While they're wandering, they kind of enjoy the sights of the city, the Flea Bottom, everything like that. But they come across a play depicting recent events in the history of the world, particularly Aegon II's birth and his new supposed claim to the throne. It seems as though the common folk are supporting him over her due to their preference for a male to take the throne, which is kind of going directly against Viserys' order, but that's beside the point. Daemon brings that to her attention, the fact that the commoners do not seem to support her at all, and she makes it clear that she doesn't really care. She is going to be the queen no matter what, and that is going to be the end of it. She is going to rule concretely, and that is her decree, which is kind of fair. That's what all other male rulers have done in the past. Why shouldn't she have the same right to? However, this could prove problematic in the fact that the commoners of King's Landing tend to make their dislike known at times if they do not approve of a monarch. Particularly, the main thing that comes to my mind when this happens is Season 2 of Game of Thrones, when they revolt against Joffrey at one point due to the poor conditions in King's Landing and the stress over Stannis' impending siege. And something similar could end up happening should Rhaenyra end up taking the throne as a monarch who is not supported by the commoners, at least in King's Landing. I'm not going to get a bit into spoilers. If you haven't read the book, just skip ahead to the time code I've marked in the description. If you haven't not read the book, that's a double negative, but I'm going to roll with it. You can keep watching here. So The main thing that I think that Rhaenys' exit of the Dragon Pit is leading to is the storming of the Dragon Pit, which is a massive, pivotal event in the Dance of the Dragons. It ends up killing, I think, 4 or 5 of the dragons that Rhaenyra currently has in her possession. It is a massive blow to her faction at court. It is, I think, one of the things that ends up resulting in her loss of the war in total. As I think, had they had those dragons in their possession, there would be no question about who was going to win the war in the end. However, I do really like the choice to do this. I've seen some people questioning whether or not it was a good call to have her outright murder all of these peasants, but I think that it does help in building the general dissatisfaction of the peasantry in the lead up to this storming of the Dragon Pit, because that is something that is going to need to be very well established prior to the storming of the Dragon Pit happening. Because otherwise, people might think of it as just essentially jumping the shark, as the commoners have been fine up until a point, and then, oh, suddenly we're going to go kill all these dragons. But yeah, no, I think it was a very good change, and I think that given the context of that future event, it'll make a lot more sense in the context of the show canon. And also, to further elaborate on Helena's prophecy, the beast beneath the boards, I do think that there is probably a double meaning there. I think that there is this initial meaning of Rhaenys bursting up from beneath the dragon pit, but also I would mention that those are not floorboards. That was a stone and slate arena. I think that there might be perhaps another deeper meaning there, but I'm not going to say exactly what that is, but I think that some of the other predictions on what that is may be correct. I was glad we got one dragon at the coronation, however, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't Sunfyre. Sunfyre is Aegon II's dragon, and he is known as the most beautiful dragon to ever live, with gold scales and pink wing membranes. We see him for a split second in episode 7, and I'd love to see more of him, as I like the design a lot. But yeah, that brings me to another kind of set of changes made to this ceremony, that being Aegon's general process of becoming king. In Fire and Blood, it is Criston Cole who convinces him to become king, though we don't quite know how, as none of the sources were in the room with them as that happened. I do kind of like that change of it becoming Alicent instead of Criston, because she has a lot more connection to Aegon than Criston does. However, it does make certain actions of Aegon's in the future make less sense, particularly one event that'll probably happen in Season 2 that I won't spoil. But I do think they could still build up to it correctly by creating some relationship between Aegon and Criston Cole in the second season, as I'm sure they know each other quite well, as he was the one who trained Aegon. However, the only one of the children that we see Criston interact with so far was Aemond, though I did very much like their interactions in episode 9 here. This is another minor thing, but I also really like the way they made Blackfyre and the Crown of the Conqueror look in the show. I've seen some people complaining that the Crown of the Conqueror doesn't have enough rubies, which I do like the design in the book a fair bit, but I also like this one a lot because I feel like the Conqueror was not somebody who needed that many jewels to adorn his helmet. He kind of just commanded the room with the one, and he didn't really need that many symbols, as he did just have that power innately. He was the one that had founded this dynasty. He doesn't really need a fancy crown, and I like that change quite a bit. To wrap up, I do have one more change from the book that I wanted to discuss. I almost made this its own video, but I thought it would be worth including here. That being Harold Westerling, who's a character that I've really liked throughout this season a lot. He's got a great presence, and I really enjoy him. However, he did die during the 10-year time skip in the books, which is quite interesting. I assumed that they were going to keep him alive to have him be another fatality of the Greens taking over King's Landing, but I was shocked to see that he just kind of walked out of that, and he was not really harmed by any means, nor did he really harm anyone for the sake of Rhaenyra, who he seemed to be very close with. I'm really excited to see where he could pop up in the future, as I think that he could be somebody who does have a lot of influence on the story going forward, as someone who is on Rhaenyra's side, or at the very least on the side of whoever is the just king, who I think he would think is Rhaenyra. It is interesting the changes made to adaptation, as there are a lot of characters that in Game of Thrones died a lot earlier than they did in the book. Think Barristan Selmy, think Stannis Baratheon, both of which were done far too soon by the showrunners. But this is the opposite case. They're keeping a character alive longer than the book did and giving him more characterization than he did have initially. And I'm happy for both of those things. I hope he has some big role to play in the future, though we'll have to see. Maybe he'll pop up a few seasons down the road, like Barristan did when he left the Kingsguard of Joffrey and then popped up with Daenerys a season or two later. I think a season later it was. But yeah, that was the video on foreshadowing and changes from the book in episode 9 of House of the Dragon. What did you think of this episode and of these changes as a whole? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the whole thing. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe, as I said at the top of this video. That always really helps out the channel. And yeah, I'd appreciate any support. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a nice day.